Hello and welcome back to the programme. The US Secretary of State has said his country does not want war with Iran, despite tensions that have increased with the seizure of tankers in the Gulf. Iran's Revolutionary Guards took control of a British flagship over the weekend, apparently in retaliation for an Iranian ship being held off Gibraltar. The British government has held an emergency meeting today on the crisis. There'll be a statement in the next hour. Here's Frank Gardner.
Under a new flag. Pictures released today show the Swedish-owned but British-flagged tanker, the Stena Impero, flying an Iranian flag. It's being held just off Iran's strategic port of Bandar Abbas after a dramatic capture at sea on Friday. This was Iranian Revolutionary Guards fast-roping down onto her deck to take her over. Only minutes earlier, this was the three-way radio exchange between the Iranian Guards, the tanker and a Royal Navy warship.
You are ordered to change your course to 360. 360 degrees immediately.
You must not impair, impede, obstruct or hamper.
Well, sorry to leave that, but we're leaving it to go straight to the House of Commons because the British Foreign Secretary is on his feet talking about this. Let's go over.
Cargo in this vital region. We've had constructive discussions with a number of countries in the last 48 hours, and we will discuss later this week the best way to complement this with recent US proposals in this area. The new force will be focused on free navigation, bearing in mind that 1/5 of the world's oil, 1/4 of its liquefied natural gas, and trade worth $500 billion passes through the Strait of Hormuz every year. It will not be part of the US maximum pressure policy on Iran because we remain committed to preserving the Iran nuclear agreement. Thirdly, while we will seek to establish this mission as quickly as possible, the government has in the meantime dispatched HMS Duncan, a Type 45 destroyer, to take over from HMS Montrose, and she will arrive in the region by the 29th of July, a week from today. Fourthly, we'll ask all British-flagged ships to give us notice of any intention to pass through the Strait of Hormuz to enable us to offer the best protection we can. We'll then advise them of the safest way to transit, which may involve travelling in convoy. Finally, we're strengthening measures to protect ships flying the flags of other countries, but which have British crew on board. Mr. Speaker, about 1,300 ships appear on the UK ship register. The combined British Red Ensign fleet is the 9th largest in the world, and on an average day, 2 or 3 ships belonging to the Red Ensign group pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The Gulf spans an area of nearly 100,000 square miles. HMS Montrose covers an operating area of some 19,000 nautical miles, and so far has escorted 30 merchant vessels through the strait during 17 separate transits, travelling 4,800 nautical miles in the process. It is, of course, not possible for the Royal Navy to provide escorts for every single ship, or indeed eliminate all risks of piracy. But those risks can be substantially reduced if commercial shipping companies cooperate fully with instructions from the Department of Transport, which we strongly encourage them to do. These changes, both short and medium term, are made possible because of the commitment this government has already made to increase our security presence in the Gulf, including the opening in April last year of the first permanent British naval facility in the Gulf for over 40 years. This establishment in Bahrain now hosts HMS Montrose along with 4 mine countermeasure vessels and 1 supply ship. Finally, let me say that it is with a heavy heart that we are announcing this increased international presence in the Gulf, because the focus of our diplomacy has been on de-escalating tensions in the hope that such changes would not be necessary. We do not seek confrontation with Iran. We've taken every available opportunity to reduce misunderstanding whilst standing by our rock-solid commitment to the international rule of law, which is the foundation of global peace and prosperity. But we must also react to the world around us as it is, and not how we would wish it to be. So if Iran continues on this dangerous path, they must accept the price will be a larger Western military presence in the waters along their coastline, not because we wish to increase tensions, but simply because freedom of navigation is a principle which Britain and its allies will always defend. And I commend this statement to the House.
Fabian Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Let me start by passing on the apologies of the Shadow Foreign Secretary that she cannot be here to respond herself, but as many will know, she's still at home recovering from the injuries she received after being knocked off her bike on Friday, and I'm sure we will all wish her well. May I also take the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to pay tribute to the outgoing Minister for Europe and the Americas, the Right Honourable Member for Rutland and Melton. He has served the Foreign Office with diligence and distinction in bad times and good.
We're going to come away from those scenes in the House of Commons, the British Foreign Secretary making it clear that the seizure of that British flag tanker was an act of state piracy. He said that we must now take appropriate actions to ensure the safe passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, urges Iran to release the tanker and the crew, and he said they are seeking to put together a European maritime mission, and says if Iran continues on this dangerous path, they must accept the price will be a larger Western military presence in the waters along their coastline. So those the key parts there of that statement we've just heard from the British Foreign Secretary. If there's more reaction, we'll monitor those events in the House of Commons. We'll obviously return to it. Now, meanwhile, as that has been going on, Iran has also said it has captured 17 spies who were working for the CIA and sentenced some of them to death. Tehran says they were all arrested over the last 18 months. Well, President Trump has tweeted that there is zero truth to those claims. He's dismissed them as lies and propaganda, adding that Iran's economy is dead and about to get much worse. Now, as promised, let's return very much to our main story, and let's go back to the House of Commons because the British Foreign Secretary still on his feet answering questions about the whole Iran seizure of that tanker. Let's listen in.
Level 3, the enhanced activity from HMS Montrose, which has done 17 transits in recent days for 30 vessels, including 16 which had the red ensign, 26 hours of helicopter flying by the Wildcat helicopters. And on the FCO side, we have been doing a huge amount to try and de-escalate the situation, including calls to my Iranian counterpart, my US counterpart Mike Pompeo, the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, who I also met, and attendance at the Foreign Affairs Council on the 15th of July, where I met the French Foreign Minister, amongst many others. So there has been a lot of things that have been happening, but with regard to his substantive point, I think it is important, if we are going to de-escalate this situation, that we do not conflate what happened both in Gibraltar and to the Stena Impero with the JCPOA and the different approach that we have taken to the Trump administration on the Iran nuclear deal. On most foreign policy issues, we are absolutely at one with the United States. We consider them our closest ally, indeed the alliance with the United States, to be the foundation of global peace and prosperity since the Second World War. We do have a difference of opinion on this issue, but we are also absolutely clear that when it comes to freedom of navigation, there can be no compromise, and that is why the solution that we are proposing to the House this afternoon is one that brings in a much broader alliance of countries, including other countries like us that have a different approach to the Iran nuclear deal. But the Iranians must understand that there will be no compromise on freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz. This is absolutely essential for the global economy and for global freedom of navigation, and this country will not blink in that respect.
Well, watching that is our Chief International Correspondent, Lise Doucette. And Lise, it's worth just saying to our viewers, we'll continue to monitor that session in the House of Commons. If there's more significant, we'll come back to it. But you were specifically listening in to that section where he's talking both about what is happening with the tankers in the Gulf and the wider strategy with US policy.
Because he's very much making the point that, the essence of this crisis with Iran does go back to last year, with the United States unilaterally pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, which has led to these crippling sanctions, including preventing Iran from selling its oil. And it is bringing us to where we are now, which is this rising tensions in the Persian Gulf, this critical waterway for oil supplies. Jeremy Hunt, though, was making it clear that Britain and other signatories to the Iran nuclear deal did not agree with the United States decision. It very much wants to try to rescue that deal, even though many people say it's all but dead now. But when it comes to the principle of freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf, they are at one with the United States in saying that we have to protect the tankers. Although he has made it clear that they are not going to join a US-led effort to improve maritime security. Instead, what he's announced today is that there will be a European maritime mission. He talked about all the European leaders he's been speaking with. So even there, Britain and other European allies are saying we do not agree. We do not want to be part of the US's maximum pressure on Iran. We want to find a different way forward.
Very briefly on this, he said in the last few minutes, we'll ask all British flagships to give us notice of intention to pass through the Strait of Hormuz so we can give them protection. And the obvious question is how, given the limited hardware that is in place?
Well, I think because it's been under such stinging criticism. Why didn't it protect this tanker? Iran had warned it would retaliate after its own tanker was seized. Britain doesn't have enough warships to protect all of the private tankers, the commercial tankers going through. So in effect, it's building in ways for it to say, listen, help us. We can't do it on our own.
Lisa, whilst you're with me, let me just also introduce pictures that have just been released by the Iranians of the crew, because we saw a still picture a little earlier, but these are pictures released by the Iranians, possibly choreographed by the Iranians, but it is pictures of the British flagged tanker and the crew, the largely Indian crew that the Iranian officials earlier in the day said were all in good health. And in terms of just the release of the pictures, first of all, there will be those who criticise the very fact that pictures of the crew are being used in any way in a story like this by the Iranians.
Well, yes, I mean, you're looking at this, you say, well, here's a crew of an international crew with Asians and East Europeans, but these are hostages. These are the crew that was in the tanker that was seized by Iran. And of course, we don't know who filmed this. Are these pictures all posed? Look at them. They look as though they're cooking food, as anyone would cook food. They looked as though they were having some meeting. When were these pictures taken? And for what reason? Could speculate that Iran has released them to reassure people that the crew members are being taken care of. They're in good health. Don't worry about the crew. We're taking care of them, while the world, principally Britain, tries to find a way out of this to get this tanker back. And Iran, of course, says that's not going to happen. It will be boat for boat, our boat for your boat.
And also access to the crew by the Indian authorities or the British authorities, which of course has not come. Lisa said, thanks for taking us through both reaction from Jeremy Hunt and reaction there to those pictures that have been released by the Iranians in the last few minutes.